Welcome. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, and this is the Happy Mama Movement podcast, a podcast dedicated to bringing the groundbreaking insights of matrescence to the world through interviews with leading experts, mamas, and those who are dedicated to making sure mothers are supported differently. These are our stories and your stories. Thank you for being a part of the Matrescence movement. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It's been a while. For the first time since I first started podcasting myself, I took a break. I didn't publish a weekly podcast episode for a couple of months. You may have noticed, maybe you didn't. And I wanted to start this relaunch, this new season of the podcast, talking about that with all of you. And that's because I really have been reflecting lately that it is so difficult for us as mothers and as women, so hard so often to be honest about our struggles, to take that mask of motherhood off, to show our vulnerabilities, to admit that we need to stop, we need a break, we have to step back. I'm sure you know how that feels. I have literally been talking about the need for mothers to look after themselves first for 18 years. My eldest daughter is 18 in November, and I wrote my first article about what happens to a woman when she becomes a mother when she was about 9 months old. Ironically, when I should have been resting, I was frantically researching and writing and interviewing and publishing what the hell was going on with me. And if you've read my book, you know that this is not an uncommon theme in my life. I have always struggled to listen to my body. I'm quite sure that's why I developed an autoimmune disease after she was born, because my body is not subtle in what it's trying to tell me. I'm just not very good, not very practiced at tuning into it. That's for many reasons. One, because that's how I was brought up. Two, in our world and in our culture, we're taught that productivity is so much more important than rest, that success is the most important pursuit, that busy is the best, all of those things. And like they often say, you teach what you most need to learn. That has definitely been my experience. And so here I am again, back around that spiral of growth, thinking I've got something healed and figured out, and then here it is again, to learn again. So this time I really wanted to do it differently. I got to a point earlier this year for a number of different reasons where I just had to stop. All of us have been through a lot over the last few years with COVID and a lot of personal challenges. I'm no different. My marriage ended. My oldest daughter became incredibly unwell with a mental health condition and was in out of hospital for a long time. To find a new house, I had to build a business as a single mum. I had to get my other 2 kids through school and do all of the things that we have to do day in, day out as a mother. And then I had quite a toxic relationship after the end of my marriage, which was the final straw, really, of not being able to pretend that I'm okay. Can't talk much more about that at this stage, but suffice to say that my usual habit of just getting through the day, getting some sleep and starting up the next day and doing it again and again and again and again, because so many people relied on me, and what choice did I have anyway, stopped working. This body of mine finally screamed loud enough to say stop. It was incredibly hard for me to stop. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because we need to normalize stepping back. We need to stop apologizing for it. We need to, if we're going to stop this process of so many of us ending up burnt out, sick, overwhelmed nervous systems, all of the things, then we have to start normalizing that we live in cycles of expansion and rest. That this idea that when really big things happen in our lives, we should just be able to get on with it. It doesn't work like that. It always catches up with us, is what I have learnt over and over again. All of the processing that I should have done when my marriage ended 5 years ago, all of the grieving and space to make sense of what my children had been through, and in particular my eldest daughter, was never there. I just went from one crisis to the next. And don't get me wrong, I'm incredibly proud of the way that I pulled us through the hardest years of all of our lives. There was a Superwoman element in me that I will always bow down to in gratitude. That part of me got us through it, made us survive, and now thrive in many ways. And I will always, like I said, be incredibly grateful that I had the ability somehow to do that. But what I've really learnt now is that habit and that incredible Superwoman ability of being able to pick yourself up and do it again tomorrow is wonderful in a crisis. But then there has to be times where we turn that off. We have to be able to soften into the more feminine. We need to rest. We need to cry. We need to process. We need to run, paint, journal, whatever it is, sleep and sleep and sleep. We have to have the off switch as much as we have the on switch. And it got to the point a few months ago where it was so obvious that the off switch needed to be turned on that I really didn't have a choice in the end. It really was that point of breakdown to breakthrough in a way. And for the very first time since I have started my own business and my own podcast and run this company, I had to message the team and let them all know that I'm going to step back for a minute, that I've been pretending that I'm thriving for too long and it's time to stop. Of course, nobody actually thought I was thriving. It was only me that I thought. Everybody thought I was doing okay. Most of the people around me could see that I wasn't. And most of the people were just so incredibly grateful that I was finally saying, I need to stop. Can you help? Can you take over this? I just can't do this anymore. But I really want to say to everybody that it's still the hardest and scariest thing at times to admit that the way that you used to do things doesn't work anymore. I think that was the scariest part of this for me, was that I kept waiting for the old version of Amy who just needed a good night's sleep and would get up and do her meditation practice in the morning and listen to a visualization about what's coming and how amazing the life's going to be, and did my mindset work, I'd be back. And I kept waiting for that to kick back in again. I just assumed it was in there somewhere. Oh, I've got to reach for this. Just one good night's sleep is all I need and I'll start to feel like myself again. Just one more meditation practice. Or maybe if I just finish this project, then I'll feel like myself again, which is pretty ironic because, as somebody pointed out to me, it sounds like the way that we feel after we become a mother and we think, oh, once they start sleeping through the night, I'll feel like myself again. Once I go back to work, I'll start feeling like myself again. Once I lose this weight, I'll be me again. And how ironic it was that although I teach this the process of massive transformation through matrescence, and we will never go back to who we used to be, but instead, on the other side, we will find a stronger, better, more authentic version of ourselves. That I wasn't doing this for myself in this process. You know, we talk about matrescence as this massive identity shift similar to adolescence, but it's really these massive moments of breakdown to breakthrough, these undoing of who you thought you were and how you thought you would do life and finding a new way. They happen in a lot of rites of passage throughout our lives, not just the hormonal rites of passage of adolescence and menopause and matrescence, but divorce, death, a loss of a job, so many different moments where we lose the footing, the foundation of who we thought we were or how we thought life would be. And then in that process of grieving and trying to come to terms to it, we reach for what we think will make us feel like we used to feel. And that's what I've been doing over the last few years, is that I was leaning on old habits, an old identity to get me through. And it worked until it stopped. And that was the hardest part for me over the last few months, was realizing that all of the things that I have done to be able to keep going no matter what weren't working anymore. It was as if my body was protesting. I couldn't get up and listen to a mindset meditation again. It was like a big feeling of being offline inside. I couldn't do the things that I used to do to make myself feel better. And it wasn't until the process of talking it through with my psychologist and working through this in my own way, I came to realize that it's because I'm not that person anymore. And it's time for me to completely redefine again who I am after the experiences I've been through. That the old ways of getting through and surviving don't work, because I'm not that old person anymore either. And whether it's matrescence or another rite of passage that we're going through, there's a space in the middle where it's like a liminal space, and you don't know who you are going to be on the other side of this just yet. And that liminal space, for me personally, but also for a lot of women I've spoken to over the years, that is quite terrifying, especially if, like me, you have always assumed you knew exactly what to do in every single moment, or at least know who to ask about it. That liminal space when you're in it is so uncomfortable. I often think of it as like the moment of crowning in labour that hurts the most, and it stretches you the furthest, and you think, I can't do this now. I can't do it. I don't know if I can do this. And then you have to push and move with the waves and move with the contractions and move with the body's natural rhythm, and you're on the other side. That crowning, that liminal space is where I was a few months ago, and why this podcast stopped for the first time since its inception many, many years ago, over 300 episodes ago, and why I wanted to come back and start this next season of the podcast and my work really with this honesty and this vulnerability, to say that it's really difficult to slow down and rest and heal and give yourself and your nervous system and your body what you really need when the world never stops, when there is another child that has to go to school, when there is another round of school holidays, when there are mortgages to pay and businesses to run and decisions to make. Really, what we need in those moments is to go into this beautiful feminine healing cave and be able to rest and cry and dance and sing and then sleep again and sleep again. And we don't get that. But I do know what I've learned from this process this time around, hopefully I have learned, is that I can't pretend that the way I used to do things works anymore. There is no going back. I've come out the other side, and literally my body and my mind won't let me work at that pace again and put on that mask again and ignore my own healing. I thought I was doing the healing work, and I was definitely doing as much as I could at the time. But what I have learnt through this massive undoing and becoming, this breakdown to breakthrough, all of those cliches, is that the way I was doing it wasn't working then either. It wasn't working for me that well either. But it was all I could do. It was all I could access. But now I can access a very different way. And now I feel like I'm coming out the other side, knowing some new truths about myself. And they're uncomfortable, but they feel really good. When we move through these massive changes and these moments of realizing things have to change, I wish that we could go into that cave, like I said, and be surrounded by other women who have been there before. I wish we could just rest. I wish we could have nourishing food brought to us and wear soft clothes and have candles around us and just have these spaces of true healing. That is what we really need. But instead, until we can bring that into place for all of us, I just really hope that by me sharing my story with all of you, you perhaps feel a little bit of permission to slow down, to tell somebody, I just can't do that anymore, to miss a deadline, to step back from social media. All of these things I've had to do over the last few months, and each and every one of them felt like my world would collapse if I didn't post to Instagram, the regular algorithm, etc., that my podcast wasn't published every week. All of these felt like such incredibly big decisions. And now on the other side of it, you know what? The world didn't collapse around me. And I'm so much better for it. So if this insight allows you, inspires you to recognize where the old ways of doing things just aren't serving you anymore, then I hope that you can begin to let them go and trust that that liminal space, that strange space where we're not fully who we are to become just yet, but we can't be who we used to be. I hope that that liminal space feels a little bit less scary. And thank you for being a part of this community and this podcast, and welcome back. I'm excited to share with all of you new stories, new insights, new lessons, new experts from around the world, as well as stories of mamas, everyday, beautiful, brave, courageous mamas who have found their own way through that massive transformation of matrescence. Thank you all for being here.